Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast. I'm your host, Paul LaFavor. I'm here with my ranger buddy, Mike Blackburn. And today is Friday, the 28th of October, 2022. And, I just have to keep saying that I'm enjoying the cool weather, the changing of the leaves and all that. And it's great to finally get out of the hot weather. So I'm hoping that everybody out there is enjoying it as well. Today we have back in the G Base, by popular demand, we have Lieutenant Colonel retired Mitch Utterback, who is, amongst other things, what's that? Present for duty.
Present for duty.
Yeah, welcome, sir. Welcome.
Well, I think what happened was he found out security was lax at the G Base, so he came to tighten us up a little bit.
Walked right in, as a matter of fact. Walked right in.
Yeah, and what I found out, and is really what we're going to be able to talk about today, is how awesome 10th Group is, amongst other things. So for those other guys from the other groups, eat your heart out. But we're really going to love on 10th Group. Mitch was also part of that formation. And what we want to talk about today, amongst other things, is the formation of the 10th Special Forces Group, which, as you know, were the originals. And so Mitch is somewhat of a historian. Not somewhat,
self-proclaimed.
But Mitch,
it kind of ties into it, don't we? I mean, last time we were here, we talked about the OSS and sort of the founding and the genesis of Special Forces. So to me, this is sort of the natural part two, I guess.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. So Mitch, and before we introduce you, for guys, if you like what you hear today, you're going to want to go back in the annals of the podcast history and find that part one where Mitch is going to talk about the OSS. I'm sure he's going to talk about that a little bit today. But, hey, Mitch, without further ado, sir.
Well, thanks, fellas. Glad to be back. You might want to change your challenge and password. I walked right into the G Base. They halted me. I said flash. They said thunder. And I walked right in. So
an old one. Yeah.
It worked.
Nice.
It always works.
Yeah.
It always works.
Well, it worked with the locals, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm here with you guys today at your invitation, and partially my alerting y'all to the fact that I have, just last month, had the privilege of participating in the Special Forces Association National Convention in Colorado Springs that was commemorating the 70th anniversary of the creation of the Army Special Forces.
Wow.
They asked me to, this year, moderate a panel comprised of original members of the Special Forces, known as the Originals, and that's why 10th Group has that nickname. Happily agreed and spent the whole week with four gentlemen in their 90s and 91, Henry Bertrand, Von Saponsi, Clyde Sincere, and Richard Simonian. And I hope some of you listening may have heard those names. And you may be members of the SF Association, and they may be in your chapters. These gentlemen were just like us when they were in their early 20s. Well, I would like that we're kind of complimenting ourselves by saying they were just like us. No, we have striven to be just like them. And as I got to know them, I realized 70 years ago, young men entering Special Forces had the same motivations, the same drive, the same undaunted mindset that we try to impart into the guys nowadays, and that at some humble level, we can admit to ourselves we all have a piece of that undaunted mindset, impavide in Latin. And it also makes me think of, remember Soft 2020 when General Cleveland came out with Soft 2020?
Yeah.
One of the things that was used to describe Army Special Forces was we can wade into uncertainty and prevail. I believe we do that still, and talking to these great originals, I realized they did it as well. But you know, the originals were World War II veterans, like Aaron Bank and Colonels Bank, Volkman, and Fertig. Volkman and Fertig in the Philippines. They, as we know, achieved great things by believing that they could and that they would be successful. These three officers in 1951 were assigned to the War Center at the Pentagon. And we as we remember our Special Operations forefathers, we think, I mean, you've had me here before, we think of them parachuting from a hole in the belly of a B-24 with the British jumpmaster saying, "Right, action stations, number 1, go!" We think of them parachuting into occupied France and linking up with their Maquis and doing the things that we're still training our troops to do now, or in the case of the guys in the Philippines, deep behind Japanese lines, attacking, harassing, and then fading back into the jungle. Something that we don't think about, though, who wants to, is the staff work, the painful staff work that they put in multiple meetings and TDY trips that they had to take to convince the Army, higher and higher echelons of the Army, that there was a need for a full-time force that would conduct unconventional warfare. And after World War II, as we often do at the end of great conflicts, we disband some of the units that accomplished the most with the least, like the OSS was disbanded in 1945. But with the fall of the Iron Curtain and the occupation of Eastern Europe by the Soviet Union, more and more thinkers began to realize that maybe Bank, Volkman, and Fertig, under the command of General McClure at the War Center, maybe that is the right idea. Maybe we need to, more than just send CIA guys in with thanks to the Air Force when the balloon goes up. Maybe we need to have guys trained and prepared long before that. And Colonel Bank, he saw that need, and they prepared briefings, and they gave briefings, and they went back to the drawing board, stayed many late nights. I can imagine Colonel Bank getting home to Catherine late, telling her what a rough day it was, and hopefully that she had something healthy and whole wheat prepared. He was a health nut, his whole life. And
why he lived so long.
In great part, yes, and because he exercised so hard. But the staff work that they put in needs a note. It's not sexy, but it's the pain that they put in to get permission and get approved. And once the Ranger companies were deactivated, the Army had its 23 to 2,500 slots that Special Forces was going to fill.
So I was going to ask you that, Mitch, is basically, it almost seems like you had Bank, Fertig, and Volkman in a room, and they said, "Okay, how'd you do it?"
Yes.
Is that basically it?
I believe, yes. Colonel Bank's autobiography, From OSS to Green Berets, it was written later in his life, 30 years after he retired. And he as an author knew that, I'll do my Aaron Bank voice, talking about the staff work isn't going to be that exciting. But Special Forces was formed from a great amount of staff work done at the Pentagon with us at the War Center. Now, I would do that impression for Catherine and his daughter, so I'm not making fun of him. I'm honoring him by doing my best Aaron Bank accent. But yeah, their TTPs and their lessons learned, their tactics, techniques, and procedures and lessons learned were truly brought into the staff work and the pitches. And they applied their capabilities indirectly by winning over agents of influence that could then carry their message higher ups in chains of command. And it was great to study how SF was formed and realize, wow, they basically won over people that were intimidated by the concept and were going to have to brief it to others, and co-opted them, brought them into the G base, and let them go out there and do great things. So as I've studied the formation of SF, I see the indirect application of capabilities and the creation and deployment of force multipliers to get the word out and get approval.
Hey, so go ahead.
I mean, you kind of surprised me here with the topic of the staff work, because you're absolutely right. We don't ever think about that. But I'm sitting here wondering, post World War II, you must have had a great deal of material, okay, from the European theater, and how they did business would be totally different than what they were doing over in the Philippines and in the Pacific. But when it came time to form Special Forces, they really, I'm imagining they're sitting down and they're bringing, going through all of that documentation and trying to bring it in and to form something that works everywhere, rather than just focusing on one theater or one area.
Rather than a Eurocentric.
And the other thing that comes to mind is, at least when I was in, SF guys get made fun of by other branches, if you will, the Navy and a lot of other places, because they think we worry too much about planning. We're or someone else is doing the planning, maybe in naval special warfare. But I mean, we in the Army, we get kind of anal. When you're working with other branches, you kind of see that we have sort of an anal nature to us as far as planning. But that's sort of in our lineage, I guess.
Yes, indeed. It is. It certainly, you can't put that in a cool video. You can't put planning and staff work in a recruitment video. Hell, you can't even put cultural competency and cultural awareness in a recruiting video. Recruiting videos, I guess young guys they want to see tracer fire, multicam, motorcycles, the helmets and the cool guy stuff. If you can get a guy doing shooting a pistol and doing quick mag changes, in full kit and a pro mask, that's gonna get him to sign up. But the planning, our planning, I have a couple of examples of where, and you bring that. It's interesting you bring that up, Mike, because I have been on a JSET with the South Korean, the Republic of Korean Special Forces, where we did separate planning, and then we each pitched the plan for our mission. And when my ODA presented our mission analysis and our staff mission brief, the Korean SF team said, they basically did a 5W. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And their actual criticism of their American counterparts was, why are you doing the work of our brigade headquarters? You have done what the brigade staff does for us. They do that exact same thing, and then they hand it to us, and we execute. And this was in 2000, and I thought this is very illuminating to see.
And I've found that to be the case in a lot of the other soft branches, where there's a higher element that always takes care of things, and the action guy doesn't need to be bothered with that. But I think the nature of Special Forces is different in that respect, where you can take that ODA and the higher staff's not going with you. That 12-man ODA has got to be able to do everything that higher staff would typically do in other
Yes,
organizations.
that's right.
So I think that's probably a really big difference between at least the Green Berets and SEALs and Raiders and some of the other members of SOF.
One of my old units, A519 in Los Alamitos, California, did some waterborne training in the Pacific Ocean with the SEALs from Coronado, and some of the NCOs, E7s from 19th Group, came up with the plan for the entire day because they're going out in their rigid hull and their inflatable boats, and they're going to do stuff. They studied the tides, and they had nautical charts, and they were ready to do waterborne infiltration properly. They asked the SEALs who were joining them, the SEAL platoon that was going to be working with them, hey, what have you guys done for planning? What have you done for just 5-paragraph op order, and what do you got? You got charts, you got thinking about the tides and the weather conditions, and this SFNCO told me, he said, sir, what they said next distilled their level of planning perfectly. And for you SEALs, you may have heard this before. The SEAL said, we're just going to wing it, brah. There you go.
Yeah, we're not trying to make fun of SEALs, but for those of us that have been in the SOF community, I mean, this is just the way it is, and it's okay.
Yeah. On the other hand,
we are just organized different to do really different things.
and that was probably like a 25-year-old kid who was a wrestler in high school.
Yeah.
However, I have served in NATO Special Operations Component Command in Kabul, where all the hard jobs were filled by SEAL officers, and they did great stuff. So I want to give both sides, like the young SEAL saying, "Wing it, brah," and then the J3 at NSOC was a SEAL officer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big difference, is just down at that E7, E6 team level.
Yep.
That's kind of where you see a big disparity. We certainly don't want to turn this episode into the glories of staff work.
No, let's move on from that in a minute.
So I had a question when you first posed this topic. The first thing I thought of was now 10th Group. I just want to make sure we get to this too. Is I believe they enumerated 10th Group, even though it's the first group, being 10th to fool the Russians, and there were 9 others. Is that true? Is there any truth to that?
There was just 10th, and that was part of the Psy War back then.
Yeah.
Just to let them think that, well, maybe let Ivan think there's a 10th one. Oh, great Stalin's ghost. Maybe there's 9 others.
Hey, and then this is something I always wanted to know too, and I don't know, maybe just for my own benefit, but was Aaron Bank just the rankingest man? Is that how that worked out? Why wasn't Russell Volkman the first commander of 10th Group? Just because he was in the PI? I mean, that would make sense to me, but how did that really work its way out?
The colonel doesn't talk about that in his book, but I do know that he was pulled from the 187th Regimental Combat Team in Korea in combat as the deputy commander. So he came from command in a large combat unit, and Volkman and Fertig commanded irregular troops. So I do believe Colonel Bank had the conventional Army credentials to be placed for the purposes also of satisfying the conventional Army. He was a man that no one could say, well, that guy just ran around in a loincloth with a crossbow.
Sounds like Fertig.
No, and that's and you're absolutely right, because generally speaking, I mean, the higher ups in the conventional side are leery of SOF and that whole community. So I think it gives them peace of mind, just thinking that they have one of their own kind of in there that is not going to be, doing a Colonel Kurtz
Controllable.
Yes, indeed. And Colonel Bank understood his operational environment. He knew how to spit shine his jump boots, and how to wear his uniform properly. And he was the right guy for both the conventional command, the airborne command that he had just recently, or the airborne unit that he'd recently come out of, and just all the tickets that he had properly punched from 1943 up to 1952 or 51, actually, late 51, and when he was selected to become the commander, to form the unit and become the commander. He actually went around the country on site surveys looking for the appropriate piece of real estate to house the troops also.
Wow. Now, something else that's going on at the same time, for those who know history, is the Korean War.
Yes,
I mean, so we have 1950, 53, but height of the Korean War, 51, and we have this. I think I know there were some SF qualified guys that made their way to Korea.
Yes, indeed.
But there was no formation that went over there.
Correct.
There might have been a different, I don't know, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but from my understanding, and I think this is where you're going to go, is they wanted to put the 10th group in where they thought they would be used the most for the next big one.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, the Korean War. Remember, it was called a police action.
Yeah.
And that polite euphemism. No, police action is a sobriety checkpoint. This
Cost 100,000 men. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big police action.
But so much of the Department of Defense was familiar with ground combat in Europe and expected that that's where it would happen again.
Yeah.
And that was going to be the main effort.
Yeah.
And briefly, though, several hundred Special Forces guys that had been in the newly constituted 10th Group were sent to Korea to try to do some unconventional warfare, and it's fairly well documented that they were not that successful.
Yeah.
Trying to do the same things that they did.
There's a pretty good book on that. It's called White Tigers, and it kind of outlines some of the work they did in North Korea. But yeah, it was kind of not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It was like piecemeal, shotgun blast, and not to discredit the planning of it, but yeah, it just didn't really make a mark. And
right.
Yeah.
And even now we wonder, well, how much of a mark would we make?
Yeah, exactly.
Over there.
Yeah.
But when Colonel Bank decided that it would be that Gruber-Riley part of Fort Bragg, known as Smoke Bomb Hill, it was fairly disused and dilapidated in 52 when he went to look at it.
Those First World War buildings.
And they were that World War II construction.
Okay, yeah.
But so when Colonel Bank describes 5-foot tall weeds and buildings that needed to have the pigeon crap swept out of them, and they had to doctor them up, I thought, my goodness, wait, those were 30 years later. Those were the same buildings I showed up when I reported to 3rd SF Training Company on Smoke Bomb Hill. Those exact same buildings. So they were in disrepair when Colonel Bank and the unit took them over in early 52, and we had a bad wet snowstorm in early 83, and part of the roof collapsed on one of them. And some of you listening might remember.
Well, they were still around when I went through ANOC in 1990, I think.
Yeah, me
How
too.
about that? There's some, and this always comes up. There's something to be said about the contract for temporary buildings and the quality of materials and the quality of workmanship that went into building temporary buildings in the early 1940s.
Wow.
How about that, huh?
So they had if I understand this also, and you may get into this, so just stop me, but I'm pretty sure he had like carte blanche to like get. I know they had the Lodge Act. You had this ability to get some of this talent from Europe, And so there's a lot of folklore surrounding the formation of 10th Group, how they get these, fighters from, guys like, help me out, the guy that was a Finnish.
You're thinking of anglicized name Larry Thorne.
Yeah, Larry Thorne. There you go.
Lauri Torni.
Yeah, I didn't want to say it because I was gonna slaughter it, but yeah.
Yes. So they got those 2,300 billets from the disbanded Ranger companies. They selected Smoke Bomb Hill and the buildings there, and it's in his book and well documented that on June 1952, Colonel Bank activated and assumed command of 10th Group, and it was just a handful of men. But by 1953, by the spring of 1953, they had brought it up to over 1,700 men. You mentioned the Lodge Act. There was a bill passed, I believe Senator Lodge. It was the Lodge bill, and it was something similar to what we have now. Service in the U.S. military, honorable service for a period of years in the U.S. military, gives you a U.S. citizenship. And the Eastern Europeans that were fleeing their countries, that were falling under the domination of the Soviet Union, were key people. As Colonel Bank called them, lodge men. I was looking for lodge men. And that's lodge, not large. Lodge men, Eastern Europeans who had fled their country as young men, who had served in the military and became U.S. citizens, if they could get a security clearance, they were prime candidates for membership in 10th Group. They were the foundation of individual teams. If there was one lodge man on a team, the language that he spoke as his native tongue became the target language of that team. Wow. And they studied his language, and he was the primary instructor for all things culturally related, area familiarization related, guiding the area study. And it's interesting also, these lodge men were mostly demo men from my research.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that was the nemesis of, the genesis. I didn't have enough coffee today, of really the language program. So you can imagine this guy kind of, in the team room, whatever, be it Polish. I would imagine a lot of Polish.
Yes.
And you can see the different letters, different words on the wall. So the team room was kind of like the school room.
Indeed, it was. And they tried to get guys to speak as much of the Eastern European languages as possible during the duty day. And there's always some amount of aggrandizement when it comes to, I've read stuff where if you walked by a team room, you could swear you were in a foreign country because of the foreign languages being spoken. Like, no, not always. But there was regular language training, and they really wanted these guys to, like we all have been. Before language school was mandatory for SF, you still had the command language program, and you had to have enough of language ability to at least let people know who you were, so that they could help you or leave you alone, is one way to put it.
I like, and I'm sure most of you guys are listening, you may not, is the original symbol of 10th Group has a Trojan horse on it. Mm-hmm. And I want to just make sure we get that out there too, because that definitely needs to be a part of this. Yes,
they created within the unit. They came up with the distinguishing unit insignia. The before there was the crest that we know now. It was a shield with a Trojan horse on it, and evoking the story of the wooden horse being left outside the gates of Troy as a gift, filled with about 30 Greeks on the inside, and Troy brought them in, and they slipped down, and you can see the Brad Pitt movie, I think, and that'll tell you about
Fill
it.
in the details.
But it was good but that didn't come about until they were transferred to Germany.
Yeah, so that's the idea is back then you had an East and West Germany. You had Berlin was also separated, and you had the Checkpoint Charlie. And then
Not
Eastern,
yet.
Not yet. Okay.
No, when 10th Group in 1953 there was a workers' uprising in Berlin, in East Germany, and before Colonel Bank got the alert from the army, he recalled the men. So when there was the workers' uprising in East Germany, Colonel Bank, heard about it in the news, recalled the unit, told everybody to start packing our equipment, get ready. This could be it. The balloon could be going up. This is why we have been created. Well, as it turned out, they weren't going to deploy immediately, but that was the catalyst that got the decision made to transfer the 10th Group forward down to Bavaria, to Bad Tolz, Germany.
Okay.
They did not board the ships in Wilmington until early November of 1953. But before they boarded the ships, the unit was split. Some men went to form the 77th Special Forces, which was constituted in September of 1953. The three of the four originals that I had the privilege of spending time with at the SFA convention, three of them got on the ship in Wilmington, North Carolina with Colonel Bank and sailed across the ocean to Bremerhaven, Germany, and then
Long train ride
down to the Bad Tolz Bahnhof, and then a walk from the Bahnhof to the Flint Kaserne, the former SS officer school in Bad Tolz, which is a beautiful compound. But the originals told me that the advanced party, some of the officers and warrant officers that went on ahead, had let a few cats out of the bag. Their OPSEC wasn't perfect because as the guys got off the train at the Bahnhof in Bad Tolz and they started walking up, kind of uphill to Flint Kaserne, they walked past large civilian apartment buildings. And each of these guys remembers the German civilians leaning out their windows and pointing at the guys marching, not necessarily marching, but walking. And they didn't really have anything to distinguish them, but the German civilians leaned out and called to them, Fallschirmjäger, 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 which is paratrooper in German. So our those back then young guys, realized, how did they know that we're paratroopers already? Who told them? And they found out that some of the advanced party had talked.
I'm still. You guys were both there, Bad Tolz. How did SF swing that beautiful facility? Was that just luck? I cannot imagine that happening. Hey, why don't you guys head on down there, and we got some nice buildings down there for you.
That's a great question, Mike. I know that there was a 7th Army NCO Academy there when 10th Group was there. So the Bavaria, as West Germany was partitioned, not only was Berlin partitioned by the Allies, but West Germany itself was partitioned by the Allies. And the United States lucked out and grabbed southern Germany, Bavaria. So if it was a SS military base just 7 or 8 years before, I'm sure that we looked at it not long after the occupation forces came in and realized, man, this is a beautiful compound. Big quadrangle. Because this was an SF officers' school, Olympic-sized pool, large athletic fields, great chow hall, everything that our Schutzstaffel is going to need. And so certainly they weren't holding on to it for the future creation of Army Special Forces, but it was just something that we grabbed somehow. And it may have been under the control of the 7th Army. That's a good question, though.
I wasn't able to be there myself. I was at Panzer Concern when I got there. But yeah, the old timers, they always talk about Toltz. I wanted to ask you this too, and I'm just kind of probably hitting those folklore questions, but is there any truth to the Flash? Aaron Bank, the Flash, they didn't have one, pool table. Is that true?
Well, there wasn't a Flash. Even photographs of General Yarborough at Bragg in '62. Speaking to President Kennedy, he didn't have a Flash. Some of the guys took pieces of cargo parachute camo nylon from cargo parachutes and sewed it on. Their berets, their commercially purchased berets, which were very popular and worn in Europe. They were worn in the field mostly at Fort Bragg, and occasionally they decided to wear it if for an 18th Airborne Corps function if they could get away with it. But as many people know, it was a calculated decision by General Yarborough to wear it during President Kennedy's visit to Fort Bragg, because one of Kennedy's military aides had been a colleague or a classmate of General Yarborough. So General Yarborough applied his capabilities indirectly and used his networks and arranged it through that aide to have President Kennedy come up and talk to him and then make a comment about the beret. So talk about going over the chain of command.
Yeah, it's
but SF-ing it, man. He did it the SF way. Like, okay, here's the president. We love this beret. We'd love it if he loved it. Yeah. And his aide planted the seed. Mr. President, make sure you talk to General Yarborough, compliment him on the beret. These guys would love it. And the rest is history. It's a mark of this, a badge of courage and a mark of distinction in the fight for freedom. And here we have it. But I
that's funny because it started off as something you'd wear in the field.
Yes, indeed.
And they would wear probably garrison caps or something like that.
Yeah, those.
And now we don't even.
That's kind of flip.
That's not even where nobody wears a beret in the field. It's wild.
No, it's
no berets, Pat, west of Gruber Road.
Yeah, it's really funny. It was a cool thing that they wore, in the field. Yeah. But yeah, so some things have changed. But no matter how much our head sweats in the summertime when we've worn this thing, we still worked our ass off to get it. So you're gonna wear that wool blanket on your head in the middle of summer.
Hey, so I'm not sure if you're going to cover this also, but I've always wanted to know about with the formation of 10th Group and the SF doctrine. And we talked about that a little bit, but and this may even be the setting, but the 7 phases of U.S.-sponsored insurgency that we have today, did that come out of these meetings, or was that something that just kind of evolved over time? Because as a student, go through the queue, I didn't really understand UW, to be honest with you, until much later. So I'm just curious about that.
No, this 7 phases certainly wasn't around then. There are references to Mao's 3 phases.
Sure.
And in '83, when I went through, I remember learning Mao's 3 phases.
But I learned it a little bit different. Now they've nuanced that too. They have I'll embarrass myself, but a strategic defense, strategic stalemate, strategic offense. But we learned latent incipient, guerrilla war movement. Yeah. So I guess they've also evolved that a little bit more too.
I remember I was so dumb, and they're saying latent incipient. I said, did they say latex?
Yeah, exactly.
Latex?
I didn't even know what latent meant.
I knew what latex was.
You just said memorize this.
I had
so
something in my wallet made out of that.
Yeah, latex. Better.
Yeah, but right around Thanksgiving of '53, the guys got to Tulsa. About 700 of them. About 700 guys stayed back to form to fill the newly created 77th. I want to make mention of the training, the early SF training. There was actually a Q course class 2-53. I've seen the training schedules. They look a lot like our training schedules now.
Yeah.
There's a column for the time, the location, the subject, the instructor, and the uniform that you'll be wearing. And so the first group of guys that were recruited by Colonel Bank, a lot of them were from World War II special forces type units. He did have OSS guys. So the first group of guys that got there became the cadre, and then the first official. They did a lot of cross training amongst themselves, but the first formalized class 253 took place. It started in January of 1953. Wow. He had enough guys by Christmas time, and get your POIs together. You'll be teaching class starting in January.
Yeah, right there in McCall.
Right there at Smoke Bomb Hill. Even.
Smoke Bomb Hill. Okay,
Yep,
yeah,
right there at Smoke Bomb Hill. So the training schedules that I've seen for class 2-53, in which Clyde Sincere, Von Saponsi, and Richard Simonian were part of, were taught by OSS operational groups veterans like Civitella, people know that name. Hemingway's son, Captain Hemingway, was in the OSS, and he was one of the instructors. And there were other OSS guys at higher ranks, like even lieutenant colonels, that were part of the inter-allied liaison missions, although part of OSS. You know, we had OSS lieutenant colonels on the ground in France. These guys were the instructors, and the program of instruction included things like conduct of a raid. And then right after the raid was over, what they called an AAR was critique of the problem. That's what they called AARs in 1953.
I'm sure the squad linear ambush was in there too.
Critique of the problem. Surreptitious methods of entry. SMO. That was a class that the originals all really enjoyed. Surreptitious methods of entry, lockpicking. They were issued lockpicking kits. They had classes. Some guys kept the kits and went on to lockpick things they shouldn't have. A memo came out from groups saying, "Turn in your lockpicking kits." And we laugh now still because you're thinking
because nothing's
it's
changed.
The same now. It's the guy gets a cool piece of kit that he can do other nefarious stuff with. He's going to try to hold on to it. Absolutely. So we got a big laugh that 70 years ago, young SF guys were thinking, "Oh man, I can use this all kinds of ways. I can use this stuff." So they hung on to it. And
what did they? There's so many different ideas about Robin Sage, and I know they didn't call it that back then. They've called it, different things, but. I'm sure they had some version of that.
Yeah.
Because it dealt with UW.
Yes, indeed.
Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, and they ran it in North Carolina. They ran it. Herb Brooker, who was an OSS veteran, and he was one of the main guys that put on some of the first unconventional warfare training in the URI National Forest in North Carolina. In late 52, 53. In late 52, 53, before the unit moved to Bad Tolz, they did exercises around Fort Benning. They did exercises in URI National Forest. And I've seen pictures of the guys dressed as G's and G chiefs. But because this was 52, 53, and the guys that were doing it, just a few years before had parachuted into France as Jedburghs, there was a lot of MP-40, German Schmeisser submachine guns and fedora hats and trench coats being worn. and it looks, the guys look like they were cast in a Hollywood movie to be doing guerrilla warfare stuff, and it's pretty neat. So
like a set of Inglourious Bastards.
Yes, truly,
like
or like 13 Rue Madeline, or the
a very Eurocentric sort of look to it.
Yes, indeed. So they were doing it right away. Colonel Bank said, "This is what we're created for unconventional warfare. We're going to start doing this." So they started using North Carolina families and police, and it started in 52. So that's how far back it goes. It wasn't called Robin Sage then, of course, but it
was Pineland.
Yeah.
The young men going through Robin Sage this year. I don't know if we have any women going through this year.
I'm not sure.
They are doing something that has been going on for 70 years.
Yeah. Wow.
We started doing UWFTXs the same year that we created the Special Forces. That was a really good question. I'm glad you asked it.
Yeah. And it's because there's old photos you could dig up, but yeah, that makes sense now that they have the Euro type of clothing, and it's probably where you have. Now you mentioned this also. I didn't want us to get lost, but the 77th, all right, which became 7th Group.
Yes.
And then at one point you had, I believe, one battalion of 10th that went forward or something like that, and the rest that was back morphed into something else, or my history is off.
So in November of 53, all of 10th went forward.
Okay.
So everybody that stayed back had been part of 10th Group, but the deputy commander of 10th Group, Lieutenant Colonel Shannon, nicknamed Blackjack Shannon, he was picked to be the group commander for 77th. So if you ever can get a hold of the very rare Special Forces Trivial Pursuit Special Forces edition, it doesn't exist. I made that up.
Yeah.
But
It's worth a
Google
fortune
that,
if you can find it.
Who was the first commander of 10th Group? Aaron Bank. Who was the first commander of 77th Group? Lieutenant Colonel Blackjack Shannon. So formerly the deputy commander of 10th Group.
And later on, I believe it was Bull Simons. Somewhere around White Star, I think he finally. But this is a little further afield.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you.
Yeah, sorry, but yeah, at that time you had two groups.
Yep.
It really started here in Bragg.
Yep.
And at some point we had all the groups here until they moved out. But
yeah, so it's really neat. It's really neat.
Birthplace.
It's really neat to know that Smoke Bomb Hill, Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
It's where and you may have seen pictures of General Retired Wild Bill Donovan visiting 10th Group when Aaron Bank was the commander. Literally, Aaron Bank's old commander came by to see, what the new parachutes looked like, what the uniforms looked like, what the gear looked like, and that was right. Some of us have been in those same buildings. Some of us back in the old days ate in those company chow halls that, the originals did KP duty in, and maybe Colonel Bank went by and said, "You need to get some whole wheat bread in here, not just white bread."
Yeah, you mentioned Donovan also. I think he said something. I don't want to misquote him, but I think he said, "You're carrying on our legacy," or something like that.
Yeah.
When he visited, because he saw that new formation, and how 10th Group was really at least part, carrying on the Jedburghs and the OG mission.
Yes.
And of course, the OGs were very similar to a modern 8 attachment.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So,
And I talked to retired Special Forces guys even this week who are unfamiliar with who the operational groups were. And they, by Colonel Banks' admission as well as General Yarborough's admission, they truly were the model for the early Special Forces detachments. And they weren't called ODAs. They were called, a 12 to 15 man operational detachment was called an Operational Detachment FA, Foxtrot Alpha. And none of the originals could remember what the Foxtrot Alpha stood for. But a higher echelon was a Foxtrot Bravo, and then there was a Foxtrot Charlie, Operational Detachment C. And they were constituted to have interaction with a higher level of resistance leader, a higher level of area command. But the operational groups selected in World War II because of their regional orientation, often for immigrants or first-generation immigrants from the target country they were going to be sent to, fluent linguists, and operating mostly, of course, in Europe. 15 to 30 men, and there's one good book out there written called Donovan's Devils, I think.
I was going to ask you about that because not only when he said you're carrying on our legacy, but you have 10th Group going to the area where OSS was in operation.
Yes, indeed.
With the basic foundational group of an OG, with the language capability and all those things. But I wanted to ask you about that. If there's any other books, we mentioned that book you just mentioned, and then White Tigers, but we did want to mention again Aaron Banks from OSS to Green Berets.
Yep.
This would have a lot of this in it.
It does. Yeah. So from OSS to Green Berets by Colonel Aaron Bank. Yeah. And it's still in print out there.
I got my copy right there.
Yep.
It's kind of tattered.
And then there are some written in the 1980s, some good history books about the particularly published around 1982. So there were a couple of books published on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Army Special Forces. So Googling Army Special Forces history book 1952 to 1982, some of them will pop up. It's one of those books does a really good description of how in 1960 the Army decided to reactivate the legacy of the 1st Special Service Force and then attach administratively lineage and honors from the 1st Special Service Force to the newly formed 10th Group, right. 77th, and then the other groups that came after it.
That's another thing that's important too, is because the Army's official, because we're an Army unit, our lineage comes from the Devil's Brigade, the 1st Special Service Force. I know how you feel about that, and me too, but legacy-wise, as Donovan said, we're from the embryonic fluid, all of that from the OSS. So we're birthed out of that.
Yeah,
along with the CIA.
Yeah, you may have heard me say, as I think in terms of metaphors and analogies, our DNA, our bloodline and our literally our genetic heritage comes from Special Forces, comes from the OSS, with a stronger chromosomes coming from the operational groups. But the adoption papers cut in 1960 say that our parents are the different companies within different regiments of the 1st Special Service Force. Yeah. And that's one way to look at it.
Fascinating. It all began with 10th Group. And we want to give credit where credit is due. Aaron Banks' push to make a 10th Group.
Yes,
so,
indeed.
I mean, you could argue there wouldn't have been some of these fighting groups, these fighting formations, there wouldn't have been these men who had the idea and the guts and, the lobbying to make this happen.
And he was only the group commander for 2 years, 52 to 54. He got him. He did all the hard work before he was the group commander in 51, the Pentagon. They pulled him out of a combat tour in Korea, sent him to the Pentagon. gave him 2 years as the group commander to do all the hard stuff. But he got us all the way to Germany, got everybody trained up. And in 54, it was time for him to be transferred to the G3 in the 7th Army over there, because he was already there. And that's when Colonel Ekman became the group commander. So the second commander of 10th Group was Colonel Ekman.
Wow.
Ekman.
And this may be, I mean, obviously we'd want to save this for a future podcast, but you had the honor of meeting the family, and I believe, I don't know, were you able to meet Aaron Bank?
Yes, I was very, very privileged to know him in later years. And if you were an SF guy in the 80s or 90s, you could have met Aaron Bank, whether at a SFA convention, I believe. Excuse me. Lot of guys, 60 and up have met him. He lived in Southern California. So did I at the time. I was a 19th Group captain and volunteered to serve permanently as the family liaison for SF, and to be, when the day came, Catherine Bank's casualty assistance officer. So as Con-Plan Bank rotated between 1st Group at Fort Lewis and 10th Group at Fort Carson every 6 months, they had Captain Utterback to always be the person being in regular contact with the Bank family. So I have spent many times visiting with them both, holiday dinners at their assisted living facility. And during that sad time when it finally came, was Catherine's CAO and her escort during the funeral, and helped pick out the awards and decorations to be pinned on. I pinned them on Colonel Bank's blazer, selected his regimental tie. This is a point of historic interest that Colonel Bank was buried wearing the Special Forces regimental tie, Special Forces Association blazer, with his ribbon rack, his jump wings with combat stars, and his World War II combat infantry badge, or retroactively awarded CIB, and buried holding his green beret, clutched in his hands in a dignified way over his stomach.
Wow. What an honor that you had a chance to serve. The father of Special Forces and the family.
Truly an honor.
Be a part of that history. Let me ask you a question. When 10th Group was organized and these various personalities from the OSS community and what have you are coming in and checking on and helping and assisting and seeing how everything's going, were there any members of the 1st Special Service Force that were involved in that?
In my research, there were, correction, there were members, it is said, of World War II airborne units, 1st Special Service Force that served in the unit. But they were not people that Colonel Bank recruited directly himself. He handpicked some of the officers that he served with in the OSS.
Yeah, I think that says a lot too, just that as well.
Yeah, his preference was for combat paratroopers and OSS members to help him stand up the group headquarters.
Yes, so obviously affected the DNA of 10th Group, and I think getting us forward, getting us started forward. But
I don't know. I mean, I had just one real quick question. Is Special Forces today? Are we doing the things that we need to be doing for tomorrow's threats? Are we focused? I mean, I know this is completely subjective, but do we feel like we're the organization is training where they need to be training, spending the time where they need to be spending the time? Is UW the big thing that really needs to be taking up most of our attention now, or is it something else going on, or what do you think?
My personal assessment is UW is the right focus. There are JSITs going on in innumerable European countries right now. Foreign internal defense and security force assistance is ongoing. But the day may come when UW is given back to us. One of the complaints of the originals that I spent time with, which many of us that are older can relate to, is there was a day when technology only allowed you to make communications once a day.
That's right.
With your higher headquarters, and that you may be the only team in country X, because your operational detachment FA is in the country, and you're being C2'd by the unit back in Tolts, or even all the way back in the States. So the originals lament the amount of technology and the requirements to report and have constant tracking of what the Special Forces operators are doing. So they feel that there is, to put it colloquially, too much adult supervision now from higher headquarters. When it was created back in the day and I also served as an 18 Echo. I had 24 hours to get my initial entry report sent, my Angus report. Can you imagine that now? A higher headquarters comfortable that a team has gone dark on comms for 23 and a half hours? Hell no.
Yeah.
So
That's so true.
So technology has created a requirement for teams to do keep.
Almost continual, constant communication today, isn't it?
Well, some units, there's every man wears a transponder. We track individuals even in some parts of our armed forces.
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, fascinating. Just to kind of go back into history to know that, and to they say if you don't know the history, you're not going to know where we're going in the future. We don't have a foundation, and so yeah, we know guys out there that are special forces, or you want to get into that. You really want to go back and to know our history, and to know where we came from, and so we've introduced some books there, some titles, and hopefully you'll go and get those, know our history, and then know where we come from, and also history repeats itself. The only thing we don't learn from history, as George Santayana said, is we don't learn from history, and so we. But yeah, it was fascinating, Mitch, for taking us down that back to the formation of 10th Group.
Thank
and
you.
to know that was fascinating. And
Incredible. Appreciate it.
yeah, appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Pinelander Podcast. And if you enjoy our content, we hope you'll check out our sponsors. Blacksmith Publishing has been serving the warrior class since 2013. We have books written by warriors for warriors. So check us out at blacksmithpublishing.com. And if you're looking for some cool Pinelander apparel, head on over to the general store at pinelander1776.com. We've got a great selection of shirts, hats, jackets, stickers, and everything else you could think of. Thank you for those people that are supporting the American Agoge Project, helping to create the next generation of warriors. And until our next meeting, remember to keep your head on a swivel, stay mentally and tactically smart, physically and spiritually strong, and socially astute. To each other we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. God bless Pineland.